We're live.
No, you're not supposed to do like that. You're supposed to go live. That's how Logan does it.
I don't even have my fancy microphone set up, so apologies for the sound quality issues, I guess, in advance. But we're gonna keep this to a hot hour, and so we'll get right into it. Kristen, how you doing on this fine Saturday afternoon?
Real good. Very excited to have Christopher Snowdon here today. He's I'm kind of fangirling a little bit today, and it's been a good week because my daughter turned 21 yesterday. I just had my birthday 2 days before that. Young 55 now. Can't believe it. So we're going to keep it short and sweet today because we're taking my daughter out for dinner for her birthday tonight. We've got about an hour trip for that. So, but yeah, I'm excited about our guest today. How about you?
Yeah, likewise excited to have Christopher Snowdon on the show. And we had my wife's birthday week last week, the previous weekend, not this week. I know better than to tell you how old she is, so you can ask her. But yeah, it was a good time. It's definitely the end of summer up here. I'm in between things I'm doing today. I did a storytelling workshop earlier this afternoon, so I was a little bit late getting here. And then I'm going back to the place, which is like 45 minutes away, to hear the storyteller give his stories.
Cool.
Nestor Gomez, if anybody's interested, look him up. He's been participating in the moth storytelling stuff for a few years, and he's won it like 60 times, and he's come all the way out to the quiet, sleepy North Country, New York, to share his experiences with budding storytellers like me. So that's really cool. And so now that we're all caught up on how we're doing, why don't we get right into it? And
wait though, before you do that, Logan's saying you should probably turn your mic up just a little bit to hear you a little bit better.
I can do you one better. I think.
That sounds much better right there.
Oh, I had this microphone on the entire time. So I'm just going to go ahead and apologize for all of that nasty. All of you
grassroots, everybody, grassroots.
Don't find me in the comments.
All right. Well,
okay. So
we'll let's do the thing for legislative. First.
Yeah, I don't
prepare any.
I don't think it's changed that much since the last time we were on here. It's the end of the year, so we don't expect to see a whole lot of stuff. The only thing I would say is that if you live in New York City, be on the lookout for something being introduced or moving in the way of a further ban on flavors. But I haven't heard any updates about that. And so, we'll update it on our website and we'll send out email alerts as more information becomes available. So that is the non-legislative update. And I figured we can probably get right into bringing Christopher on.
Cool.
Fantastic. That was a seamless transition.
We do have Logan in the background doing everything today, guys. But here's Christopher Snowdon.
Hi.
Yeah, welcome. Kristen went through the effort of putting together all of these notes and a nice introduction for you. So I'm going to go ahead and read this, especially for folks who may not know who our guest is. Christopher Snowdon is the head of lifestyle economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs, or IEA, based in the UK. His research focuses on social freedoms, prohibition, and policy-based evidence. That's not a typo, is it?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, because we always hear evidence-based policy, and I'm sure we'll get into that. He is a regular contributor to The Spectator, Health Blog, and Spiked, and often appears on TV and radio discussing social and economic issues. He's the editor of the Nanny State Index and the author of 4 books: Selfishness, Greed and Capitalism, The Art of Suppression, The Spirit of Level Delusion, and Velvet Glove Iron Fist. He's also written more than a dozen reports for the IEA, including Drinking Fast and Slow, The Proof of the Pudding, Denmark's Fat Tax Fiasco, Cheap as Chips, Sock Puppets, and Closing Time, Who's Killing the British Pub. Welcome, Christopher Snowdon. Thank you.
Thank you. I've written 2 more books since you got that intro as well.
Have you? Oh my goodness.
So yeah, that's going back a bit. But yeah, look, it's great to be on. I really admire your organization. I really admire everyone in America who is trying to push back against all your insane laws. I don't envy you one bit. So, well done for your stamina and perseverance.
It's a grind over here for sure, but I know I think I speak for many people, many of our members, of course, who are grateful for your work and your continuing contribution to this. I think the impetus for having you on today was something that you had written on your blog about this suggestion that Twitter needed stricter content moderation so that people weren't getting all kinds of funny ideas about less harmful tobacco products. Maybe give you the floor here for a minute and kind of discuss that a little bit for our folks who maybe haven't read your post.
Sure. I mean, this is one of many studies that is based on just people going through Twitter. Now, I go on Twitter a lot, but I don't really claim it's an integral part of my job, and I don't try and get research out of it. But there's been a lot of it the last few years. I think COVID led to a lot more of it because of the lockdowns and stuff. So even these public health researchers who are mostly just looking at their screens anyway, looked at Twitter even more. And it's kind of creepy, actually, some of it. I mean, not this particular study so much, although it is a bit kind of weird. But, there's been a lot of studies, specifically involving vaping, other things too, but specifically involving vaping, where they just they basically, spy on you. Well, not spy, I guess it's a public platform, but they stalk you, I guess. It's cyber stalk you, right? So these are, I don't mean people of any, political significance. I just mean normal people, and they see somebody saying something positive about vaping, and they just assume that this must be somebody, either a bot, they don't seem to really understand what the word bot means, or somebody from the industry, and you can't check this stuff because they don't publish every single tweet that they're talking about, and it would be a violation probably of privacy if they did. But I see enough of Twitter, and I know enough vapors on Twitter to know that these people are legit real people. I've met quite a few of them, and in fact, now and again, when they have quoted one of these tweets, I could work out who it was, and it is somebody I know, and I know they're not a bot, and I know they don't work for industry or anything else. Anyway, there's been a number of studies where they look at people's tweets about vaping, and the general conclusion is that most people who are tweeting about vaping are very pro-vaping, or at least fairly pro-vaping. You guys know what it's like on Twitter when it comes to vaping. You have a small but dedicated bunch of people who tweet about vaping one hell of a lot, and they are not really counterbalanced by a commensurate number of people who hate vaping and tweet about how much they hate it. There are a few people who tweet about how much they hate vaping, but not very many at all. And they don't go on about it that much. So the obvious conclusion is, that at the very least, vaping has some pretty passionate adherents who really believe that e-cigarettes are a fantastic miracle product that could get many millions of people off cigarettes if given the opportunity. But this isn't the message that the people who are doing these studies want to hear, because in the case of this study you specifically mentioned, I think it's somebody from the Truth Initiative is one of the authors, and Truth Initiative, I gather, is some kind of disinformation organization that you have in the States. It's a lie about vaping, funded by the taxpayer, I think, quite significant sums of money. So yeah, they don't want to hear it, they don't want to see it, they don't want to believe it. And sometimes when people who are, fanatical about something, as these people I suspect are in their hatred of vaping, they will go to great lengths to block out the information that they're outnumbered. Basically, the people who are fanatically pro-vaping are a greater number than they are, and so they went through Twitter with regards to one particular issue that's quite interesting and quite funny, which is the fact, and I think we probably can call it a fact at this stage, that people who smoke, possibly people who take nicotine overall, but for sure people who smoke are at less risk of catching COVID-19, catching SARS-CoV-2. And this was a interesting hypothesis initially with Konstantin Farsalinos first noticed this, looking at the very early data from China in February 2020, where, as a matter of course, these hospitals would take a note of whether someone's a smoker or not. And he noticed that if you consider how many people in China smoke, which is a lot of them, far fewer smokers were in hospital with COVID-19. Now, that was just a correlation. People often say, correlation is not causation, when actually they're implying that it really is. But on this occasion, the people in hospital bound to be old for a start off, right? So, you can't just look at the general smoking rate in the entire population. But then other studies came along and they did the appropriate epidemiological tests, and they age standardized it, and they adjusted for sex and various other confounding factors. And time again, you got this really quite strong association. It averages out roughly at like a 50% reduction in risk, which for a global pandemic prior to the vaccines is really a pretty big deal, right? I mean, it's actually better than the vaccines in terms of reducing transmission, right? And this has been shown dozens and dozens of times. I've been updating a blog post that I started towards the middle of 2020, and I'm not claiming it's any kind of meticulous systematic review, but I have had my eyes on the prize thanks to a guy called Phil on Twitter. You probably know, incredible workhorse. And he lets me know when a relevant study has been published. And when I say relevant, I mean one that uses normal epidemiological techniques, adjusts for age and sex and what have you. And I'm now actually up to 100. I'm going to stop now because I can't carry on with this forever, but I'm up to 100. I'm on 98 officially, but I've got 2 more from Phil, and I'm going to update them shortly, and then I'm going to stop. And of those 100, about 93 or 4 show statistically significant reductions in risk from catching COVID using various different methodologies. Very solid result. There are a few that kind of lean in that direction, but they're not statistically significant. And there are 2 or 3 that suggest that smokers are more likely to get it. Now, it's not just weighted numbers epidemiology, is it? But that is an overwhelming majority of studies. And if this was about anything else, if this was about the risks of smoking, you would have stopped after 20 and said this is overwhelming. So that is it's a very interesting fact, and people don't want to talk about it. And in a way, it's kind of a useless piece of information, because public health agencies are never going to tell people to start smoking to reduce their risk of COVID, and everyone's going to get COVID anyway. Most people already have had COVID, so the fact that smoking makes you less likely to get it is neither here nor there. We've all been vaccinated. The whole thing's basically over as a major public health issue. But nevertheless, it's interesting, and I think the fact that it's not been taken on. The fact that people in public health have not shown much interest in it, I think, is in itself interesting, right? So then you get this study. As I say, not the first one, but it looks at what people are saying about this particular issue on Twitter. And it includes people like Farsalinos, who did this original study, and he's tweeting about it and saying, wow, this is pretty, interesting, and maybe it's nicotine. And this is what these guys are really interested in. They're not bothered about smoking, because smoking's kind of pretty much done and dusted as far as they're concerned. As you know yourselves, the Truth Initiative and like-minded bodies are mainly interested in clamping down on e-cigarettes. And it was merely the suggestion that it might be nicotine, which it probably is, that was leading to this reduced risk of SARS-CoV-2 amongst smokers that got them agitated. And I think it's too late for me to say, cut a long story short, because I've been going on for so long, but because I'm relatively short, they found lots of tweets about this issue, and most of them were saying it looks like smokers are at less risk of COVID-19. And so a few of them were saying this could be nicotine, therefore possibly cigarettes have a part. They consider, the authors of this study consider this to be disinformation. What they do is they introduce a study with a couple of cherry-picked, you can barely call them studies really, but one of them was by Stanton Glantz, who very early on put out some piece of junk saying actually smokers are at more risk. And it is true actually that smokers possibly, or quite possibly, suffer more when they get COVID-19, right? But that's not actually the question that's at stake. And even that actually isn't certain. The only certain thing is that former smokers definitely suffer more from COVID-19, presumably because they have underlying health conditions, which is perfectly,
which is probably why they quit.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's not that they should have kept smoking necessarily.
But
they get they have worse outcomes when they get it because they've already damaged their bodies. Fair enough. But the fact remains that smokers themselves are less likely to get it, and that's the real question. And the authors of this study avoid that question because that would lead them down a path they don't want to look at. And they say, well, this is appalling because you've got loads of people. Well, they say, I mean, it's actually a really small number of people. I think it's like 28 people who they're following here tweeting about this. I mean, it's really of no significance. I'm fairly skeptical about how much Twitter changes anyone's mind anyway. But, Farsalinos and a few other people and a journalist and me or whatever tweeting about this, really, it isn't, during a pandemic, haven't you got better things to look at in public health? Apparently not. So they write this all up and say, of all the tweets we looked at, most of them were saying that they think that smoking reduces the risk of COVID. Not many of them were saying the opposite. This is a big worry. And the line that that made me laugh a bit at the end is I'm quoting here: the observable pro-vaping bias of the most outspoken users discussing COVID-19 and nicotine inevitably meant that even attempts to debunk such information on the platform did not receive nearly the same amount of traffic. Now that just seems to me, it just sounds like somebody who's not got many followers complaining about not getting many retweets.
Sour grapes.
I mean, it really does. I think there's probably not much more to this study than that. There's some nutcase at the Truth Initiative was replying to tweets saying, no, actually, if you look at this glance analysis, you'll find that, blah, blah, and everyone was ignoring him or mocking him. So that's the state of public health science these days, state of anti-vaping science. A huge amount of it is based on trolling Twitter and then simply asserting this is the truth. And I guess this is the kind of serious part, is they assert from the outset this is the truth, that smoking does not prevent COVID-19. In fact, it makes it much worse. And therefore, when we present to you these Twitter accounts saying the opposite, even if they're only legitimately asking questions or just simply sharing a news article, which is what a lot of these guys were doing. They were just sharing articles from The Economist or The Telegraph, reputable news outlets who had reported this at the time. The Guardian. Quite a few people reported this at the time in 2020. Even that's disinformation. Sharing an article, which in itself wasn't saying like smoking definitely prevents COVID. Let's make everyone start smoking and vaping. It was just saying, well, this is a thing that's happened.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. A couple of points I think that you've brought up here. I don't know if this is a fair enough characterization broadly, but I think it's been our experience that so few people from tobacco control side or tobacco side have done any with us whatsoever. I mean, the idea that one of these folks would come onto somebody's tweet and reply with, oh, you should check out this study from Glantz. I mean, automatically that's going to get dismissed. But, we haven't had a lot of social media engagement with these people. And so I guess, I mean, the most social media engagement that we've had with these folks is that all of us are on a blacklist somewhere. And I mean, we've been blocked by people that we've never interacted with. So do they just automatically, they've jumped to that conclusion that I'm not going to get any traction with this community. I should just skip that and go right to making policy recommendations?
Well, that's a very good point, because what they talk about in this study is gatekeepers and gate watchers. So they invent this term, as far as I can tell, has never been used before, called gate watchers. And the basic idea is that in the good old days, there would be gatekeepers of science and peer-reviewed journals, and established doctors could go on TV and say things, and people would believe them, and that was the way it should be. And if only we could go back to that. And social media and the internet has allowed everyone to have a voice, and some people are using their voice in a way that the Truth Initiative doesn't approve of. And so again, it's not just this study; it's a whole literature, you could probably say now, of studies in this area, in which these guys in ivory towers are looking at the plebs on Twitter and Facebook, seeing what they're saying, are disgusted by it, and then they never quite say, we need to censor the internet, although they do get quite close to it at times. But at the very least, they're saying, this is a big problem for us. This is a big problem that we've got people out there who are sharing articles from The Economist.
I loved the one line that you said, because you said in the paper, it said, this is a quote, although more research is needed, we contribute strong evidence that the ideological lean of the most prolific tweeters on a given subject, pro-vape users discussing COVID-19 and nicotine, directly influence the spread of problematic information that nicotine could prevent COVID, though retweeting much of the most broadly disseminated posts. And I love the next line that you wrote. Now do anti-vapors and see what they've been saying. You wouldn't believe the amount of problematic information those guys pump out, which is so true.
They're not ideological at all, are they?
No, not at all.
Ideological is such a weasel word. Generally speaking, you can't see into, you don't have a window into man's soul, so you don't really know what their ideology is. I guess if it was like your Twitter account or something, people would go, okay, well, it's a pro-vaping account. But is that ideological as such? I mean, can't people come to a reasoned conclusion without having some kind of ideology?
Informational, we think.
There's nothing wrong with ideology, strictly speaking. It's just always used in a pejorative term. I have an ideology, but I would say it's based on kind of principles and philosophy and thinking things through. But it just sounds bad because it makes you sound like a fanatic. You say, well, you're only ideologically opposed to that. Well, I mean, in the true sense of what that means, I'm opposed to it because I've read a lot about it, I thought a lot about it, and I have certain principles. But so what? I mean, presumably I'd like to think that you're in the same position. It doesn't get you anywhere. It's just there as a kind of a slur, So all they're saying is, people who are pro-nicotine were more interested and more receptive to this hypothesis than people who hated nicotine and want, smoking and vaping stamped out. Well, no shit.
I know a lot of us found it very interesting because we're always told by tobacco control that nicotine has no benefits, and there's no reason for it to not even exist, even though we know there's lots of studies with Alzheimer's and things like that. But so to me, that was fascinating, because here's a possible another benefit of nicotine above and beyond just recreational use.
Well, it's got to be, assuming this finding is true, which I mean, it really does seem to be, okay? Yeah. All right, it's not useful with COVID-19 for the reasons I've already said, but, if you can establish what's going on there, that really could be genuinely useful for other viruses and stuff along the line, right? And medicines, potentially. It's at least worth looking into. And if you have this kind of blackout about it, and you've got peer-reviewed studies explicitly saying this is just a lie disseminated by a few cranks on Twitter, you potentially could be missing out on quite a useful medical breakthrough, couldn't you? I mean,
I mean,
when you allow this, I'm going to use the word, ideology to overcome science like this. I mean, that really is a problem of ideology. When you're going, well, we can't talk about this. We can't talk about any benefits of nicotine, because people will get the wrong end of the stick. People will start smoking. I don't think anyone started smoking after reading these articles in order to prevent getting COVID-19. It wasn't going to happen. So we shouldn't be panicking about that kind of stuff. But it's perfectly plausible, and various scientists in these numerous studies have put forward biological mechanisms that I'm in no way qualified to comment on, but they seem to know what they're talking about. And it's certainly not ridiculous to suggest that nicotine could have something to do with the ACE2 receptors or whatever it is, right? I mean, it's as soon as this hypothesis was first raised based on how few Chinese smokers are in hospital, people were going like, yeah, well, that would make sense because nicotine does do that. We do know this about nicotine. Yeah. So let's not shut down this, potentially useful area of research just because we don't like e-cigarettes.
Right. Well, they probably were afraid that in the middle of a pandemic, oh my gosh, people won't quit smoking if they know this. Like anybody was thinking about smoking when people were dying from COVID. I'm sorry, Alex, what were you saying?
Well, no, as more broadly, I mean, this is an excellent point that applies to really all drugs, and that especially here and in other places around the world, we've had this federal prohibition on all kinds of drugs, and cannabis, of course, is in the spotlight. Psilocybin now with its the potential to treat PTSD and other issues, but it's still federally illegal, and so we have researchers. I don't know if beating down the doors is the appropriate way to say it, but there is this vacuum of knowledge about these substances, and I think this certainly is part and parcel with that. It's sort of like be still my beating heart. If anybody finds out that the suppression of your immune system is actually a good thing in the face of COVID-19, what kind of craziness are we going to see? And I may be misremembering this, but I think. Once these reports were coming out about nicotine or smoking, maybe I don't want to say preventing COVID-19, but seeing lower cases in people who smoke. If I remember correctly, there was France pivoted to say, okay, we have to put there's a limit on the amount of nicotine replacement therapy that you can buy.
Yeah.
Because so that was really the only example I can think of people like panic buying nicotine.
Yeah. I mean, just obviously these these reports do have some kind of effect. I doubt anyone was actually taking up smoking, probably. No. But yeah, they took up NRT, and what's the harm in that? I mean, one of the interesting studies that came out only a few weeks ago, very interesting because someone finally got around to doing this very obvious research, is that they gave a certain group of people in hospital who had COVID nicotine patches, were smokers. I mean, not non-smokers. They gave, I think it was randomized. I could be wrong, but they certainly had a group of smokers who didn't get nicotine patches, and they had a group of smokers who did. And the ones who had the nicotine patches did a lot better. Their survival rate was better. Their outcomes were better. They were in hospital for less long. Now, this seems to me an extremely powerful piece of evidence that needs to be followed through on.
Yeah. With the right amount of research, perhaps you're coming up with an application that can be used for, not limited to people who smoke. There's a lot more room to explore here. And ideologue is the word that, gets us mixed up with ideology. But it's the ideologues that stand in the way and are really a barrier to discovery and curiosity, especially in this issue.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating issue because, I mean, it's such a crazy, who would have predicted it, right? You got a respiratory disease and smoking seems to prevent it. I mean, I didn't really believe it. I just thought it was a funny finding, But as I say, 100 studies now, at least, 100 that I'm aware of, all pretty much all pointing in the same direction with a plausible biological mechanism behind it. It's an amazing kind of way of highlighting this problem because you mentioned dementia, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, diseases that do seem to respond to nicotine. Pharmaceutical companies do research with nicotine into them, and yet we're told that all the studies that show that smokers are less likely to get these diseases are all just funded by big tobacco, and we shouldn't trust them. So we are cutting ourselves off from potentially really quite useful data. I would like to think that people who really study this stuff ignore all that noise and just crack on and look at it. But I'm not sure that's happening with nicotine and coronaviruses, because of course it could apply to other coronaviruses. This is the relevant thing.
Yeah, that's true.
For sure.
I mean, it's interesting because they not only did they do the study of following people on Twitter, and they were deliberately misleading how they twisted between, they're doing all this misinformation on Twitter, and in fact, people who smoke have worse outcomes. It's like that wasn't question. That wasn't what those studies were about. It wasn't about outcomes. It was about getting it.
Yeah.
And they do that a lot. You'll see them do that a lot with things in research. Because I ended up reading a lot of research too with this job, and they'll twist it. They'll it's like, why are you asking that question, or why are you answering that question when really we should be asking this question? But that was so deliberate. Of all these people are talking about how are misinforming about COVID preventing or nicotine or vaping or smoking preventing COVID, but really, it's misinformation because people have worse outcomes.
Yeah, it's very slippery. These guys work by constantly asserting things and then doing it again and again and again in different studies until there is an overwhelming body of evidence. These guys obviously they are the gatekeepers, right? I mean, they really are the gatekeepers. They have way more access to the peer-reviewed literature than scientists who are more kind of open-minded about this. I'm not saying that impartial or pro-vaping scientists can't get published. They do, and there is good stuff gets published, but it's a minority because all the money is with the likes of the Truth Institute and the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids and Stanton Glantz and these anti-vaping lunatics. And science shouldn't be decided by weighted numbers, but I think in terms of practical politics, it usually is. And so what you get is a group of scientists will produce incredibly flimsy and academically worthless research like this, just trolling through Twitter, trolling through Facebook, watching TV advert, whatever it may be. I mean, the standard of some of the stuff I read is laughable, right? It's literally just people sat around. And although it has no worth in and of itself as academic research in any way, they will include these assertions. They will say that nicotine causes brain damage, and vaping doesn't get people off cigarettes, and there's a gateway effect. And they'll repeat all this stuff again and again and again, even when it's not even directly relevant, really, to whatever pathetic conclusion and results that they've come up with. And it just builds up this echo chamber, really. But then you can cite this and you can cite that. And if you need to go lobby a politician, you can bring a stack of papers along that big and slap them down and say, these people all say that ends, or whatever stupid word they're using for e-cigarettes, don't work. They don't work, and flavors are bad, and there's a gateway effect, and so on and so on and so on. And there are at least 50 or 60 studies about vaping come out every week. Yeah. I get I'm on a mailing list and see them all, and about 90% of them are anti-vaping, and the vast majority of those are either involve incredibly trivial research like the kind of thing we're talking about today, or they're glorified op-eds,
right,
or they're pointless and meaningless experiments on zebrafish or petri dishes, or
right.
maybe and it is, even though it has no intrinsic value, there's a lot of it. That's basically what they rely on. There's a lot of it, and they will always outnumber the decent, honest scientists, because the money, especially in America, is all on the anti-vaping side.
And if you look at the anti-vaping studies, you can't really call them science so often, because a real scientist would look at something and say, well, why is that? Why is that the case? What is causing that? And they'll just come up with something, like about dual use, and say, so many of these smokers haven't quit. That's a bad thing. Stop it there. Boom, vaping bad. They don't go, okay, well, why is that? Could it be because the people who have the hardest time quitting smoking are the ones who are turning to vaping? Could it be, there's so many other things that they could look at, but they don't care. They're just looking for something to say, it doesn't work. It's bad. You shouldn't be using this. It's just, and it just reminds me of in your book, Velvet Glove, Iron Fist, you quoting Stanton Glantz, and when he said that somebody asked him what his goals were, and the reporter was surprised when he didn't say that it was, to save lives or to help people. It was to destroy the tobacco industry. And I mean, that was a bright light moment for me when I read that in your book, because it's just, it's true that he and a lot of these people don't care about people who smoke. They don't care about their health. They just want to destroy the tobacco company. And a lot of them turn around after say, you ask them, well, what would you do after this? And they say, find a different cause, you know? But your book, I often tell people who are advocates to Velvet Glove, Iron Fist, and even Art of Suppression, but Velvet Glove, Iron Fist, because it's talked so much about how tobacco came to be. And I mean, I couldn't put it down the first time I read it. I'm rereading it again right now. And it really opened my eyes to how tobacco control people got to where they are, what their roots are in, and what their real goals are. And if you understand that they're not about helping people, you understand that all the different things that we used in early on in vaping advocacy, those arguments aren't going to work, because just their MO is so deceptive and disingenuous and self-serving. And I always tell people your book should be a must read for any vaping advocate. And we'll put links to his books in the description later on, you guys.
Thank you. Yeah,
but it's a must read.
Buy it now from America, because the pound is a 30-year. So yeah, it's when a pound is nearly $1 now. So this is a great time for me to be from Britain. No, I mean, when I started writing that book, I did it before it was one of these things where you have the idea for the book and then you do the research. It wasn't like I knew a lot about it. I thought I'd write a book about this. It was, I thought, I was still a big smoker then, and I didn't really know any anti-smoking people. I didn't know anybody who wanted a smoking ban in pubs. And I wondered who these people were. And I assumed that they would be, maybe not necessarily to my taste, but they would be quirky or eccentric individuals, fanatics, single issue guys, whatever. Which, of course, for most of the anti-smoking history, they were. And you have people like Lennox Johnson, you might remember, and Lucy Page Gaston, pretty classic weirdo prohibitionists and stuff. Oh,
wait. Just I have to stop you there because you mentioned Johnson, because he popped into my head earlier too, because of his whole Twitter thing. Because he was so crazy that anybody who disagreed with him, he'd be like, addict, you're just an addict and you're working for the tobacco companies. And I thought, oh my God, that sounds just like the people on Twitter who are calling us bots. And that was what, 200 years ago? I mean, wasn't that the 1800s? Late 150? Late 1800s, was he?
This is the guy, I should say, for those who haven't read the book. He was injected he was addicted to injecting himself with nicotine. Basically, he gave us, I think, by injecting himself with nicotine. Then he started injecting other people with nicotine, and it was all to show that nicotine was addictive. I mean, it's actually quite useful research. I mean, he was way ahead of his time in some ways. He was kind of an extraordinary guy, but he very quickly became a fanatic because he was convinced pre-Richard Doll that smoking caused cancer and nicotine was extremely addictive, and he wanted to get rid of it at a time when like 60% of the UK population smoked. It was never going to happen. And then he got very jealous of Doll and Hill because they then kind of proved using epidemiology that smoking caused lung cancer, and he never really forgave them, and he kind of went off into the wilderness. Really, he's kind of John the Baptist figure of the anti-smoking movement. But yeah, he's a good example, right? Someone who's kind of an interesting character, and you can kind of admire him in a sense, even though you think, he's not really enough of a libertarian for me personally, but who is? But then you get to certainly the 90s. By the time you got to the 90s, the anti-smoking movement is entirely just professional enterprise. It's a business. It's a racket, really. Certainly with the Master Settlement Agreement, it pretty much officially becomes a racket. So you don't even have interesting characters. I mean, I put Glance in the book quite a lot because he's a slightly colourful character, and it's interesting to see that he has now, carried on and become like the main person that all the vapors hate.
His Banzap for a while, but he just kind of disappeared.
Yeah, kind of. There's a few with you when you run a book like this. You've got to pick 3 or 4 characters and bring them into it to represent other people, because obviously there's more people. You don't want that many characters, and a lot of them are really bland. That's the bottom line. And this is my point. Nowadays, they're all really bland because they're just doing a job, and they do this job for a while, and then they go off and do another job. They go and join, an environmental NGO or something else. They're not. Their hearts aren't really in it. They're just being paid to do it. But And you talking about this kind of makes me want to ask this question. My sense of it is in America, with the anti-vaping thing now, it is more of a genuine moral hysteria. I mean, maybe there are cynical people who are just doing it for a job, paid a lot of money, the Truth Initiative or whatever. But my sense of it is, unlike in Britain, that there is a real reefer madness kind of insanity going on.
It's the same Save the Children thing you saw with tobacco, in the early anti-tobacco stuff of, and like you said in your book, in the beginning, it was all about stopping children, from
I don't
getting
think the anti-tobacco thing was ever that hysterical, really.
Well, yeah, I don't know when they were, I don't know. Maybe you should read your book. Teasing. But yeah, the thing that they're doing is basically all about save the children again. And it's just the same thing that they started with the anti-tobacco stuff. And they're ignoring all day, all data. Anything that says that vaping's down, smoking's down, that's all ignored, so it's got to be a moral thing and not. It was all about flavors. Let's ban flavors because of kids, but tobacco is okay, flavor's okay, so they're not dangerous, but only dangerous if they taste like bubble. Generation addicted, which is not showing up.
I think this is not a one-to-one like America story, but I did have a conversation with a parent in Quebec recently. My wife is from Quebec, and so we went there for her birthday barbecue. And one of our friends has kids, and his daughter is vaping. I think she's 14. And so knowing what I do, he came up to me and asked, so is it really as bad as they're saying? And I went through the whole spiel of, it's better that she's vaping instead of smoking. And the most important thing is that you can have an open and honest conversation with your children. And as far as and he was very concerned about gateway. And I said, look, it's poly use is the better explanation. It's not, a progression to more dangerous or risky products. And the most important thing is that, always give your kid an out. If they've got that trust, if they can call you when they get into a situation, that's the best thing for them. And pointed him, I still need to send him an email with some educational materials from the Drug Policy Alliance. But, the other thing about this, I think parents are looking at this, and I don't want to speak for you, Kristen, but because I'm not a parent, but I think parents are coming at this with that concern and fear of all the horrible things that they've heard. And then, and that's the real parents' concern, but it turns into a morality issue with this constant beating of the drum of tobacco companies are preying on your children, and that's wrong. Yes, any industry that is peddling harmful things that we know are dangerous, that is preying on unsuspecting customers, we agree that's a bad thing to do. And they can only the real deception here, of course, is that they don't pay any attention to how this industry actually came to be, and specifically vaping, in that this was a ground up consumer movement because the tobacco companies weren't adapting to our needs and public health wasn't adapting to our needs. And so we just did it on our own. And that's the part of the narrative that I feel is intentionally left out all the time. And so that's kind of how they can get away with making this a morality issue.
And that's why they work so hard to associate us or vaping with big tobacco as opposed to being what it really is. And it's I was going to say something else, but I forgot.
I noticed that. It's interesting. I don't think that the big tobacco kind of rhetoric, I don't think has ever gone down quite as well in Britain as it has in America. I think maybe even in Velvet Glove Iron Fist, I think I quote Stan Glantz saying something along the lines of, harnessing this hatred of big tobacco and indeed of big industry generally has been like one of the most powerful things that we've had in his cause. And I think that's true. I don't think it's ever really taken off, particularly in Britain. I mean, you talk about big tobacco, people will go, ooh, even in Britain, but mostly because it's been imported from America. People probably couldn't tell you a lot of the time exactly what you think big tobacco has done. And the big tobacco story, the files that were sent to glance stuff. There was American stuff. The relationship between the tobacco industry and the government in Britain was actually very different. I mean, they were working together on safer cigarettes in the 70s. I know there were too in America, but they kind of had a different thing going on in Britain where they were trying something quite weird, actually, which I won't go into. But the bottom line is that they had accepted that smoking causes lung cancer, basically, which is, of course, not what they've done in America. So, I mean, my point is, I don't think like rank and file people in Britain kind of blame the tobacco industry for people smoking, by and large,
Right.
I don't think they think that they're preying on people. I think we just think, well, some people like smoking, some people don't, and it's getting less and less common, less and less popular. But that particular bogeyman has never been quite as strong as it has been in America. And also we have more of a history of harm reduction in Britain. I mean, not like at the population level, but at the academic level. So Michael Russell, Robert West, and McNeil, Clive Bates, these people have, they never got snus legalized, but they were interested in it. This move, as I mentioned before, in the 70s, trying to create the safer cigarette. There was an understanding that nicotine was basically safe, right? And it was, it was a tar that kills, like Russell said. So we were very lucky in Britain, really. That's what it comes down to. We were lucky because they could easily have been banned. It could easily have been put under medical regulations. Right. And I don't give many props to Deborah Arnott at ASH, but, she swung on this particular issue. If she hadn't, it could have been different. If a few people like Linda Bold of Public Health England swung a different way, it definitely would have been different. Right. But some of these people, fortunately, were not in the ivory tower, or they weren't always in the ivory tower, and they stepped out of the ivory tower at least long enough to meet smokers from time to time, to listen to vapors from time to time, and the vapors here were pretty vocal. And just in the nick of time, they saw with their own eyes that there were smokers who they'd been giving nicotine patches and gums to, who didn't even touch the sides, it made no difference whatsoever, who were of their own accord going down the high street buying a vape and giving up smoking, having never given up for more than like 6 hours before, and they just didn't dismiss that. They understood that was obviously a good thing. They're anti-smoking campaigners. Of course it's a good thing. This is a gift from God if you're an anti-smoking campaigner. This is what drives me insane. I'm sure it drives you insane. I don't even like anti-smoking campaigners. I think people should be able to smoke if they want to. I don't care how many people smoke. But if you are an anti-smoking campaigner and you've got something that gets people off cigarettes, no cost to the taxpayer, why would you be against that, right? And so
like Stanton said,
you have to assume either these people are incredibly stupid or they're bad faith actors. There is no other option, is there? There's no alternative. Am I being unfair?
No.
The only other thing I can think of is fear.
Kill tobacco. Fear.
I think it's fear, and I've had to sort of consider moderating my own tone when talking about all of this, because I don't want to participate in these people having a reason to dig their heels in harder. I've sort of thought for a while that there are researchers in this field who are sort of indoctrinated into the very rigid anti-tobacco stance. But as we've seen, there was that group of young researchers who had that article published, and they're pointing out the divisions in tobacco research. I think there are a lot of people who are perhaps maybe they feel some responsibility for some of this garbage that they've published, and they would rather take that. I mean, I'm sure there is an easy way to navigate this and save face and just come around as science does. Science changes, our understanding of the world changes. And there is no need to, persecute somebody for making a mistake that one time, even though it led to people being misinformed and dying. It's still, that's the progress of science. But yeah, I think for not all, we only see them and folks, but for there are some of them who are just scared and figure that doubling down is the best way to go. Keep their heads down, keep their job. I think a lot of folks have expressed fear in going against the grain in tobacco control because you end up on a blacklist.
Well, yeah, I mean, the same thing happened with like secondhand smoke studies that came up that you wrote about, Christopher, about how they got blacklisted by daring to say secondhand smoke didn't have evidence behind it. They didn't find any evidence that it did that.
Can I mention another Twitter-based study before we go?
Sure.
Oh yeah.
I say it's Twitter, but I don't think I've written about this one yet. But I found it absolutely stunning. This is actually a reasonable piece of work. It's still basically just a survey, really. It's a glorified survey, so it's not like the state-of-the-art science. And although it portrays itself as being about Twitter, it's not really. They just showed a group of people. It's a randomized study. They showed a group of people 4 messages, but these messages were on tweets. That's the only like Twitter element to it. They're not trolling people through people's Twitter feeds. And as far as I can see, they didn't need to be on tweets. They could have just been on a piece of paper or something. But anyway, they showed different groups one of 4 messages, and one of the messages was, 2 of them were true, 2 of them were false, basically. So the 2 that were false were that e-cigarettes are totally safe and vaping causes popcorn lung. And there was 2 that were true. I can't remember what they were off the top of my head. And cut a long story short, they found a fairly small increase in the number of people who would have negative views of vaping if they were given false, harmful information, and vice versa. Right? I mean, not particularly staggering results by any means, and the effect size was pretty small. But yeah, basically the conclusion is if you lie to people, some people will believe it. Right? But what's incredible in this study, and I'll read out the title of it later on if anybody wants to look at it, is that no matter who they were, what they've been told, whether they were given the truthful information, the false information, or no information at all, hardly any of them correctly said that vaping doesn't cause popcorn lung. I mean, like less than 10%. In fact, I'll give you the exact figure. It was the people who were told that vaping is completely harmless. 9.2% of them thought that. 12.1% of them. Having been told it was completely harmless, up from 9.2, so like 3% change their mind based on a fake tweet saying that vaping is completely harmless. Though that was the highest number, 12.1% believed that vaping didn't cause popcorn lung, down to 6.8% for people who were given information saying that vaping was as harmful or more harmful than cigarettes. This is incredible. I knew that this popcorn lung myth was like the most pervasive myth going around the internet.
One of
it's
them.
the kind of thing that people in the pub who are not interested in the issue at all, have never vaped, will mention popcorn lung. So I knew it was very widely held. I didn't realize that it was more than 90% of the population, judging by this study.
That surprises me too, that it's that big. I mean, but it wouldn't surprise me if the numbers were very similar for EVALI right now. And it's getting even worse that's spreading. I mean, I've seen articles from The Guardian talking about EVALI. And I mean, in The Guardian, I mean, which is funny because I always wondered why they were that way. And then I saw in your book when I was rereading it that they used to be pretty anti-tobacco from way back. But you see articles all the time about them repeating all the crap that's coming out of America, heart attacks and strokes and popcorn lung and EVALI, and that it increases it. I mean, there was a horrible one, and I'm gonna email you this video from this guy who's a neuroscientist or neurologist or whatever that's going around. They did a 2-hour show on nicotine, and boy, it's just, you wanted to shake the screen after it. But yeah, there's so much misinformation that I'm not surprised people believe it. And how many doctors still think that nicotine causes cancer, or and hopefully not in, I mean, even in the UK, I'm seeing that it's like spreading over there. We're like, I don't know, we're like the syphilis of countries, and we're just infecting all of you.
Well, yeah, I mean, I hate to say it, but yeah, I think that's pretty much true, because it is. I mean, they're always from California. These studies that are scaring people.
Yeah.
And, I understand the journalism business. I get that bad news sells and good news doesn't, and so on. I think it's bloody irresponsible, really, to be publishing things like, e-cigarettes worse than tobacco, when you probably don't even believe that as a journalist, and you're just trying to get a headline. But I'm not going to start censoring the press. I get how it works, but it's it's always from the Bay Area of California, this kind of stuff. Ivali has had, I think, had some impact even in Britain. You have to remember, for those of you watching in America, which I guess is most of you, we have in England, we had Public Health England. It's been closed down because it screwed up on the pandemic, but we had Public Health England, and the current government is of the same mind. It was actively pro vaping, right? We are going to have e-cigarettes prescribed on our health service quite soon. And yet, despite all the positive messages coming out of the government, out of our public health agencies, understanding and knowledge about vaping, the risks and benefits compared to smoking, has gone backwards massively, especially in the last 3 or 4 years. Ivali's definitely been a big part of that. The junk science from the likes of Glance has definitely been a big part of that. But it goes against what is genuinely a consensus in this country. We're one of the few countries that actually has a proper consensus where our health agencies are promoting it. You go to stop smoking clinics and they will tell you to start vaping. They will recommend it pretty much as the first thing they do. You can buy cigarettes everywhere. We have flavors, as many as you want, and it's gone backwards here, and it's gone backwards across Europe, and it's gone backwards everywhere. It's been an incredibly successful disinformation war waged by the likes of particularly Mike Bloomberg, obviously with his many millions of dollars. This guy is a curse upon the earth as far as I'm concerned. He could have done so much good with that money, and he's spending it on trying to get e-cigarettes banned and getting taxes on soda. It's ludicrous. It's obscene. Look, things are getting worse. But the reason I mentioned that study was because I knew things were getting worse, but I didn't know they were that bad. No idea they were that bad. I mean, this is like 8% basically of people don't think vaping causes popcorn lung. That's more or less the lizard man constant. You're familiar with the lizard man constant? It's the number of people in any survey who believe that the world is run by lizards.
Right.
About that kind of proportion, right? Yeah. In any survey, somewhere around 5% of people would just give you an insane random answer.
It's and it doesn't help any that you see so many, people like our Surgeon General putting all this stuff out there. You see celebrity doctors who are on TV putting this stuff out there. Like I said, this guy who I was just talking about, and I can't remember, Nathan something, or I don't remember what his name is. I'm going to send you the link because if you don't want to blog on it, I'd be surprised because it is insane what he's been saying. I mean, he's got like 460,000 followers on YouTube. I mean, just they put this stuff out, and and in this whole video, he's just stating it as fact, that vaping's more addictive than smoking, and we know. I mean, he uses the words "we know that" so many times that I'm yelling at my screen, going, "No, we don't," and you're lying, And it's so everyday people just
on TV are the absolute worst.
I'm sorry, what?
Arrogant family doctors on TV are the absolute worst.
Yeah,
like
I mean, he's
TV physicians.
Yeah, and he's a neurologist or something.
They're on TV usually because people kind of trust them. And,
and then when we try to talk to them on, like, what's that guy's name? I can never pronounce his name, but people are always tweeting with him. I mean, I'm on Twitter a lot because of this job, so I do see a lot of these posts, and I see a lot of these interactions, and I see a lot of the bad stuff coming out from people saying negative things, and I see a lot of us. I try to stay back and kind of let the gang do their thing, but they get blocked all the time, even if they just share a link from, like, the Cochrane report or from Health England or from a valid source. And they'll be like, here, you might want to watch this, or read this, and blocked.
And then they come up and say, wow, it's really, the vaping people are really angry.
They're so mean too.
They always do that. It's like these people come out, they lie through their teeth in a really damaging way. They get backlash from, we have to admit, they're a pretty, organized group of people, vapers. I'm not, maybe organized isn't the word, but they are a concentrated interest group who feel very passionately about vaping. My theory is because they're ex-smokers, right? And ex-smokers are always like the most fanatical ones. And that as an ex-smoker myself.
Hey, now I'm an ex-smoker.
Well, yeah, they always have a certain sense.
But I read your book, so I know better.
But then, so these journalists, like they throw the petrol bomb into the garage, run away, and then go, "Wow, people really got upset by that. It's pretty. I guess I touched a nerve,
Journalists, doctors, politicians, they'll just throw that out. But there's a question here that somebody had for you, and now I can't find it.
So we are at the end of the hour here, but I did want to get to this question and ask one sort of concluding question. I think they may be in this. I'm going to try to link these two questions together. But first, from Mark Sliss, how much does the UK public trust the Public Health England and the NHS? And also, which I think this is all sort of part of this, my sort of, how I can get up in the morning every day and keep doing this is I sort of have this core belief that because smoking touches everybody, I mean, all of us know someone who has died early from smoking, has lived in agony because of smoking. Everybody around the world knows at least one person. So this is a very popular issue. My sort of question, I have some degree of confidence that this would be the case, but it's still a question, is if we can get this right, if we can turn the tide on this issue, is it possible to kind of kick the door open on a bunch of other stuff? Because I feel like, just like we all know someone who's died early from smoking, we also can, I think it's easy to see how interconnected all of these issues are, whether we're talking about substance use or driving too much, or diets and exercise, healthy lifestyle stuff. If we can turn the tide around this, can we actually get in the United States? I'm going to let you answer about Public Health England and the NHS, but can we get in the United States a CDC that we can trust, or an FDA that are actually functioning as arbiters of good and bad information? What are your thoughts on that?
So I don't quite understand the question. So you're saying that if we win this battle with vaping, can we get a kind of snowball effect and what, liberalize a lot of other things?
I think that's probably the simpler way to put it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, for the first question, I mean, the NHS is the most revered institution in the United Kingdom by some distance, with the possible exception of the royal family in the last couple of weeks. I mean, it's just every survey suggests that it is adored beyond all reason, and I mean all reason, because it's a really terrible system that kills thousands and thousands of people every year. People have this kind of cognitive dissonance, and that they know that they've waited 9 months for an operation and the tumor is getting bigger, but they still worship it because it's free at the point of use. But yeah, do people trust it? I think basically they do. I don't know whether people trust in Public Health England particularly, but I think pretty much so. And yeah,
maybe he meant what they say about vaping.
Yeah, I think people thought it was. I mean, if anything, because Public Health England was known as a nanny state agency, the kind of organisation who would ban anything. So the fact that they were saying actually this is a good thing, it probably was more powerful, because people were used to them saying, well, don't drink and eat your greens and blah blah blah, and they were going, actually vaping's cool. You should if you're a smoker, you should definitely give it a go. So I think they were a trusted source in that sense, but it made no difference to the worldwide panic. It made no difference to the Varley line, the popcorn line, the rest of the stuff. We fell for it, not quite as much as other countries, but not far off, And to your question, Alex, yeah, I mean, no, I think is the answer. I mean, I'm always waiting for this tipping point, at which the public gets sick of being told what to do, and they overturn whatever was the final straw, and they then go, actually, this is the same thing, this was the same thing. I think there will be a final straw. I just don't think it will lead to a snowball effect. I mean, in Britain, probably other countries, I think the final straw will be the food control, for want of a better word. After alcohol control and tobacco control, it'd be food control. And you're not dealing with a persecuted minority there. You're dealing with everyone,
With everyone. Yeah, and everybody who's watching, we'll give you the list and everything. But Christopher writes about all of this stuff on his blog about what they're trying to do with alcohol, what they're trying to do with food. That's why Bloomberg, I'm sure, was on your radar long before he got into the vaping thing because of the whole soda tax and all that. Just the general nanny state, and the book that's behind him, Killjoys. Can I share that? I'll share the. That's not published though. I only saw the PDF.
No, there's hard copies available, but
okay. I didn't see it on Amazon.
You can download it for free from the IEA web. Just Google it; you'll find it on the IEA website. You can
I was looking for it on Amazon. I didn't see it, but I will provide links to that. I just started reading that too, and you really in the beginning of CASAA helped us see what we were up against. And I think that's one of the reasons why we didn't become just a vaping organization. We became a tobacco harm reduction organization. We tried to make sure we were inclusive and not just saying, well, this is our favorite way to quit. And this is all, and that's something else you wrote about in Velvet Glove, was that a lot of the pipe smokers and the cigar smokers were perfectly willing to give up cigarette smokers in the beginning because they weren't coming after them. And we saw that exactly start happening with the vapors and saying, well, I don't have to have clouds and I don't need 50 milligrams. So go ahead and ban that. I don't need this flavor or that flavor. So to me, that's one of the reasons why your books are just require reading if you're advocacy. They would have seen what I was trying to tell people. Look, you're doing the same mistake. You're doing the same thing, that you can't complain these people. You can't, this is not going to work if you start throwing each other under the bus, because they're going to come for you. And I learned that from your book. So that's one of the reasons why I tell people they need to read this stuff.
Freedom is indivisible, and all these issues are related. It kind of comes back to Alex's question, which I think that the full answer to is, if you guys win the war on vaping, I think we in Britain, touch wood, I think we kind of have, but it certainly hasn't led to a rollback of the nanny state, and that's for a quite understandable reason actually, which is that vaping is seen as something that advances the cause of public health, whereas the other stuff is a threat to public health. So all that needs to be done is you like the nanny state index mentioned before. Okay, this is a league table of countries around Europe, and we rank them for over-regulation of tobacco, food, soft drinks, alcohol, and vaping. Well, vaping is clearly the odd one out there, right? Because it's not, nanny state is about paternalism. It's about making people do what's best for them, right, for their health. Vaping shouldn't really be in there because it's not paternalistic to discourage smokers from switching to e-cigarettes. But once you disentangle that and say, actually, this isn't the same thing at all. This is more like dare I say, a medicine than a vice. Then you get what you get in Britain, where it's seen as a kind of unofficial smoking cessation device, and over-regulating it isn't this nanny state behavior. It's just stupid. It's stupid and counterproductive. So once you win the battle on vaping, which you can only really do on public health grounds, you're not going to do it on libertarian grounds, as you know. Then it just becomes it's just in a separate field. It's a separate category. And so people are quite free to carry on going after hamburgers and soda and cigarettes and alcohol.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Well, I think we got our answers. We got a lot of great answers, and we certainly had a really great time having you on, Chris. And are you
have you again?
Are you
come on anytime? I love you guys and your organization.
So many other things to ask.
Are you headed to GTNF next week?
I am indeed. I'll be getting there on Monday. You going?
Yep, I'm on a panel. I'm between Brian King and Brad Radu, so that should be a good time.
I'm on early doors. I think like the first panel of the whole thing, really, on Tuesday night.
Oh, so fantastic!
Prohibition. Is it coming for cigarettes and tobacco?
Wonderful. Well, I hope we'll have a chance to chat there, and we'll certainly have you back on as the situation continues to snowball out of control.
Winter is coming.
And with that, again, all of our gratitude for joining us today on Saturday. And now I'll do the outro stuff I'm supposed to say. If you are new to the CASAA live stream, new to CASAA, new to this issue at all, please check out our website at CASAA.org. It's CASAA.org. We are on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram under CASAA Media. That's also where our YouTube stuff lives. And this live stream, as well as some of the Twitter spaces that we've done and will do in the future, all live on our pages on SoundCloud and Spotify and all the other places where you get podcasts. While you're visiting our website, be sure to check out our merch. We have t-shirts that you can go and advocate and style. Danielle's done some amazing work on all the graphics there. So pick it up and be the conversation piece at the next party.
And speaking of merch, we will have links to Christopher's books in the description. So.
Oh yeah, definitely check out the and you're, of course, I think in our we're working on, or we have started working on, kind of a reading library, all the books and stuff that people should check out, also available on our website. So with that, I think we can wrap this up. Only 13 or 14 minutes past our expected closing time.
I do need to just give me just a second here. Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, Christopher, thank you again so much, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. And I hope we can get you back on here soon, because I have so much stuff I'd love to talk to you about and pick your brain.
Let's make a day.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Awesome.